Gary Lineker is never far away from the headlines, is he? I wonder whether he's got some kind of addiction to being in the papers, or whether he's got some kind of addiction to just talking about himself all the time. I mean, I can be accused of talking a lot, but I don't really go banging on about myself in the same way that he does. We played you something that he said the other day about his right to give his views on all manner of things, despite the fact that it would appear to be counter to BBC policy, because he's a BBC presenter, of course, and he's not supposed to put out any ideas or thoughts that he's got, particularly political ones. But even for him, this latest revelation about his growing up as a child is extraordinary. Have a listen to this.
Because I was like, you know, this tiny geeky kid with like, you know, darkish skin, and I know it's pretty much racist abuse. Although I'm as English as they come.
Really?
You know, yeah, all the time. Even in professional football, I had that a couple of times. I wouldn't ever name any names. Yeah. So I got that kind of nonsense, which was a bit weird.
Darkish skin. I mean, I presume, like some of us, he's probably made up to do that particular podcast. He probably put makeup on. He hasn't got dark skin. He's a white man. He's got a tan, like some people do get when they go on holiday. But isn't it a bit insulting if you happen to be somebody who has suffered from proper racism, somebody who does have darker skin because you are of a different ethnic persuasion, that you're now watching a white man, an incredibly successful white man who has had very few what you might call obstacles to a very successful life, who drives several very expensive gas-guzzling cars while bleating on about saving the planet, who talks about giving kids healthy food while representing a fast food crisp company and getting paid very handsomely for it, who talks a very good game about helping the poor while living a very expensive lifestyle as a millionaire, multi-millionaire, nothing wrong with that. I just think Gary Lineker needs to kind of wind his neck in a little bit and stop making out that he is a victim of anything. He's a very, very lucky man. He's represented his country at international football. He's got a very well-paid job, subsidised by the general public of Great Britain. And yet, he still finds time to make out that he suffered racial abuse, despite the fact that he is not actually from an ethnic minority. He's making out, basically, that the people he went to school with are complete morons. That's nice, isn't it? Lovely. What a nice chap. Gary Lineker, victim. Not a great look, is it? Let's talk about a couple of big things. We've just done the Gary Lineker latest nonsense where he claims that he was suffering from racial abuse. The thing that's interesting about what he says is that, rather unlike himself, he trips himself up. He goes, I'm about as English as you can get. Now, I think he means I'm about as white as you can get, but I hope he didn't mean that you can only be English if you're white.
This is a particularly egregious and pathetic example of people of the left who have this manic, visceral desire to be victims. So, in my view, he's invented this story of racial abuse, even though, as he says, he's English, he's white, but he needs to be a victim. So I was subjected to racial abuse because I had slightly dark skin.
Rubbish.
Did anyone ever notice that Gary Lineker had dark skin? I didn't.
No.
I didn't, as you said earlier. He used to get taunted for his big ears. That's not right either. You don't attack people the way they look, but never for being dark-skinned. I was there. I was a football fan. I went to lots of matches when he was at his height. A very good striker he was too. Never once did I hear Gary Lineker getting taunted for his dark skin. He just wants to be a victim. You cannot be a scion of the left unless you have victim credentials. Yes. And he's come up with this absurd example. What a lot of nonsense.
I know.
His most pathetic emergence into the Twitter sphere so far.
I mean, you would think he'd had enough of an outing on Twitter to do all of his wokery there, that he now has to invest himself in other people's podcasts. Maybe we should get one of Thought Police.
Yeah. If he dares.
That would go too well.
Gary Lineker, Match the Day host, former England striker, of course, and BBC presenter who, for some reason, is allowed to spout his political views, despite that being completely in breach of the BBC guidelines, has decided to speak out about the terrible abuse that he suffered while at school and during his football career because of his, in his words, darkish skin. He says he suffered racist abuse at school. He said as a tiny geeky kid in Leicester, he would have been bullied without football. He said he was racially abused a couple of times as a professional footballer. He says, I was kind of marginally, I think I would have been bullied at school. He said, I was this tiny geeky kid with darkish skin, had pretty much racist abuse, although I'm not. I'm as English as they come. Let's talk to Charlie Peters, who's a writer and broadcaster, about this. Good morning to you, Charlie.
Morning, Julia.
So, darkish skin, but as English as they come. I think, he's already fallen foul of a classic statement there, hasn't he? But the idea that the English as they come, white British celebrity, multi-millionaire Gary Lineker has been a victim of racist abuse. I mean, we are now into the realm of the absurd, are we not?
Yes, we are indeed. And it was an uncharacteristic misstep, I think, from the Lovian chief there. But come on, I mean, it was only a matter of time before Gary Lineker wanted to get in on the victim culture grift. The guy laps up every single social justice cause, every opportunity to wax lyrical about his progressive credentials. I imagine it became very frustrating for him to talk about all these problems and never be able to say, it also affected me.
I mean, there's rarely been a bandwagon that he hasn't wanted to jump on. It has to be said there's Black Lives Matter or trans rights and things like that. I think is he upsets as many people as he manages to actually please. But of course, he wouldn't know the people he upsets because he blocks everyone. I'm one among I think millions of people he's blocked. Never sent him abuse. Never. I don't do that on Twitter. I mean, but he just doesn't like me asking him questions or retweeting him making a comment because he's allowed to make a comment, but I'm not allowed to make. He's entirely entitled to block anyone he wants. But I imagine he does live in one of those echo chambers we hear so much about these days.
Absolutely, and I think part of that comes down to a level of ideological cowardice. He doesn't want to hear the alternative perspectives to his own, and also with this little vignette from his youth about being quote unquote racially abused.
Yeah.
Why doesn't he name names?
Well, probably can't remember the names. But also, I mean, as we were talking about one of my guests earlier on the show, the playgrounds of the 1970s. I mean, they were rather... He's 61, yes. He would have been, secondary school in the 1970s. They were rough, tough places. And, yeah, a lot of people suffered some horrific bullying. And I know people who are black and Asian who genuinely suffered proper racial abuse and totally, often, especially if they were living in an area where they were very, the very, very few people who were ethnic minorities. Life was very different then. People who pretend it hasn't improved now, frankly, are living in cloud cuckoo land, because even though there are still issues, of course there are, nothing like what it was then. But the idea that because someone would have made a joke or a comment or something, that he therefore was a victim of racist abuse. I mean, that's like saying if he blacked up, he went to a party with Justin Trudeau, who, as far as I can tell, never went to a party for 20 years without blacking up in some sort of black character of some sort, that he, if someone laughed at him, that he was receiving racial abuse. I mean, it makes a nonsense of these claims.
It is kind of emotive, sensationalised silliness. And he says it stretched into his football playing career. So if this did happen, if he really does believe in, kicking racism out of the game, I think, I said it before, I say it again, I think he should name names. I think he should be brave, make an example of this, and let people answer to this bizarre accusation he's making about his own experience. But really, actually, if he actually wants people to deal with racial discrimination in the BBC, for example, perhaps he should turn his attention to targeting the BBC's anti-white hiring policies in job adverts, where they say they only hire people from ethnic minority backgrounds. Perhaps if he really believes in tackling discrimination in his organisation, he'll take his aim on that.
Yeah, it does seem bizarre, isn't it? Again, ultimately, though, he was always going to go there. It was the natural, logical progression.